So, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today in the second webinar of Kutch Manthan series. Under this Manthan series, Kutch is organizing quarterly stakeholder consultation on pressing regulatory issues of digital economy. While our first webinar was on non-personal data governance, this one will focus upon the information technology intermediary guideline rules from the lens of consumer welfare and ease of doing business. A few announcements before we begin. This webinar is being video recorded and also live streamed on YouTube. The video recording will later be uploaded on Cut's website as well. Apart from the speakers, we request all participants to kindly keep their mics on mute throughout the webinar. However, please feel free to post your questions for speakers or give any comments in the chat box at any time. You may direct your questions to any particular speaker if you like, or the moderator can assign the question to any speaker. We will try to take them up during the discussion. With this, may I now request Amol to kindly start the discussion?
Sure. Thank you, Siddharth. And my senior colleague Vipul was supposed to give the opening remarks, but I understand that he's down with fever, and that is why I have now the opportunity to give a brief opening remarks before we begin this discussion. So on behalf of Cuts International, I would like to welcome each one of you to today's webinar on information technology intermediary guidelines. The fact that you have made time for this discussion despite the severe second wave is testament of the importance of the topic and faith you have reposed on us, for which we are very thankful. For the discussion today, we have an eminent lineup of speakers. We have Dr. Amar Patnaik, Member of Parliament and Member Joint Parliamentary Committee on Personal Data Protection Bill. Mr. Rakesh Maheshwari, Coordinator and Head Cyber Law, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. Mr. Daniel Castro, Vice President, Information Technology and Innovation Foundation and Director, Center for Data Innovation. Mr. Ashish Agrawal, Vice President, Public Policy, NASCOM. Mr. Gurshabad Grover, Senior Researcher, Center for Internet and Society. Ms. Jhalak Kakkar, I'm so sorry, Program Manager, Technology and Society, Center for Communication and Governance, and Mr. Srinivas Kodali, Independent Researcher. So we would have a mix of perspectives from industry to policy influencers to experts to researchers, and we would like to have an engaging discussion. But we'll come to the discussion in a bit. As India reels under the pandemic, internet has emerged as a force of good for citizens to come together and help each other. It is this positive potential of internet that needs to be preserved and leveraged as we work together to build back a better, inclusive and fairer world. For this to happen, we must ensure that regulatory actions do not unintentionally adversely impact consumers and startups who have a critical role in economic recovery. This is not to suggest that misuse and abuse of internet should go unchecked and accountability is not set. That is why specific, proportionate, and risk-based regulation is in the order. It is in this background that we are having today's discussion. Intermediary guidelines were originally envisaged to provide safe harbor to internet firms, subject to them undertaking specific due diligence requirements. With increase in both use and misuse of internet, there are legitimate calls to revisit the guidelines. These calls need to be met with responses targeted to address the problem while resisting the temptation to go overboard, else they run the risk of being inconsistent with Digital India and ease of doing business programs of Government of India. However, inaction is not an option, and balance between interests of consumers, businesses, and state needs to be achieved. That is why evidence-based regulation, which takes into account costs and benefits on different stakeholders, including consumers, is the way forward. Since last many years, Cuts has been relentlessly working to highlight consumer perspective on issues intersecting technology and society by collecting evidences from the ground. We have recently completed a study on understanding consumers' perspective on encryption and have attempted to analyze the findings of this study in context of the intermediary guidelines being discussed. The link of our study will soon be pasted on the chat box, and I will request my colleague Setu to make a quick presentation on what we have found. Subsequent to the presentation, we will get down to the discussion. Setu, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Amol. Let me just share my screen. Yeah. Again, thanks, Amol. Hello, everyone. I'll try to make this brief and quick as possible. So, as we all know that after much deliberation, the 2021 IT rules were introduced, bringing with them not only regulatory and implementation challenges, but also challenges in the ease of doing business, while also threatening the consumer welfare at the same time. It is therefore important to have informed discussions like these to in order to ensure that the guidelines not only have intended positive effects without having spillover consequences. In this presentation, I will talk about some of these possible and intended effects that may threaten ease of doing business as well as consumer welfare in India. So while there are several issues that are of concern when it comes to intermediaries, a proportionate and balanced regulation may be needed to deal with these challenges. The new IT rules threaten the very foundation of consumer welfare through a variety of ways. For instance, arbitrary takedown of content, which might end up restricting consumer access to information and curbing freedom of speech. The rules also threaten consumer privacy in their communications. As a result, the usage of consumer communication tools is likely to reduce if privacy is threatened. And without a robust data protection law, these rules could go against the principles of data minimization and limitation by requiring forced identification to problematic content through additional data collection and processing. At the same time, several of the provisions in the rules may violate further protections to consumer. For instance, these rules include provisions for executive orders to take down content without necessarily judicial oversight, and requiring intermediaries to identify originator of content, which may require breaking of encryption, thereby compromising the privacy of consumers' communication altogether. To elaborate on the issues that I just mentioned, let's take a look at the key findings from the study that we recently concluded. To understand the consumer perspectives of encryption, we conducted a large-scale study. In this study, we found out that on average, respondents claim to be willing to pay for encryption to ensure privacy of their conversations. We also found that the exposure to problematic content almost entirely comes from unencrypted platforms like social media and search engines, rather than encrypted communication systems. Now let us look at what happens when end-to-end encryption is taken away. Respondents' perceived likelihood of unintended recipients accessing their chats is increased significantly, while at the same time, respondents were either likely to reduce exchanging some forms of information or stop exchanging information altogether. Based on these findings, our study recommended that the protection of end-to-end encryption on instant messaging services is of paramount importance. It is also important to note that the intermediaries have a potential to derive economic value out of end-to-end encryption by making privacy as a competitive selling point. On that note, let's move on to how IT rules might act as hurdles when it comes to ease of doing business in India. You see, while on the one hand, government is removing penal provisions from Companies Act and trying to remove hurdles to facilitate ease of doing business in India. At the same time, within the intermediary rules, there is a plethora of issues that might act as hurdles to ease of doing business. For instance, in the rules, there are penal issues where intermediaries may be forced to comply with rules to avoid liability, while also fueling risks to deterring foreign investments in India. Similarly, there are severe time limitations for implementing and complying with these rules that this rule might have to be rethinked. This kind of mixed messaging by the government may repel investment in the country, jeopardizing the goal of India becoming a $1 trillion economy. Further, startups who may fall in the category of significant data fiduciaries may find it difficult to comply with due diligence requirements, which may adversely impact the government's Startup India and Digital India mission. thereby having a chilling effect on innovation. Several of the provisions within the intermediary guidelines indicate that the rules might end up doing more harm than good, not just to businesses, but also to consumers. Now, let us see what other jurisdictions are doing to deal with these challenges arising out of intermediaries. So, in the US, there's Section 230 of Communications Decency Act and Digital Millennium Copyright Act. As far as we understand it, only laws that dictate the intermediary regulations in the US. Section 230 has been a prerequisite for the growth of internet and how we see internet today. However, it is important to note that there is a strong political consensus to repeal or revise the section in order to deal with these issues. We have with us an expert today on Section 230 who might help us understand the US perspective in detail. Moving on to the EU, just this week, the European Parliament adopted a law requiring internet companies to remove or disable access to flag terrorist content. The law explicitly excludes what is not to be targeted. There is also no obligation for internet companies to preemptively monitor or filter their content. In Australia, under the proposed Online Safety Bill 2021, content removal can be requested by Safety Commissioner in specific cases, which are related to CSAM, with child abuse, depicting intimate images, bullying, or aberrant violent conduct. And if we talk about Manila principles on intermediary liability, intermediaries are not required to restrict content without an order from independent and impartial judicial authority. The common denominator, if we see across all these jurisdictions, is a measured and balanced approach, where the regulation deals with specific purposes and without a blanket coverage. There is also no requirements to break encryption, and penal provisions are only imposed through a judicial body. Based on these learnings, it is apparent that there may be there may need to be some form of regulation for intermediaries, but such a regulation must be balanced. And to do that, we need to think about some key issues, like how do we balance the need for identifying the originator of problematic content and securing the privacy of chats and consumers, and how to balance curbing the spread of problematic content while respecting principles of data minimization and data limitation. We also have to think about why is there a need for mandatory judicial oversight in executive orders of content takedown, and if there is a need to rethink the penal provisions for the lack of due diligence and risks of overcompliance. With these questions, I would like to hand over the floor to my colleague Amol to proceed with initiating this discussion ahead. Thank you. Over to you, Amol.
Thank you, Setu. So for me, there were three things which stood out from the presentation. First, consumers value privacy and derive immense utility from end-to-end encrypted platforms. Consequently, any concern about doing away with encryption can result in reduction in usage of such platforms. Second, while consumers encounter problematic content on end-to-end encrypted platforms, such content is significantly higher on other unencrypted platforms, and thus government should perhaps focus elsewhere. Thirdly, globally also, there are calls to reform intermediary liability regulation, but such calls are measured and targeted and not broad-based. With this, let us move on to the panel discussion. In the interest of time and ensuring multiple rounds of discussion, I would request each panelist to please provide their opening remarks in around 5 minutes. I would also encourage audience and other participants to key in their questions through the chat box so that we can take them in subsequent rounds. Firstly, I would like to go to Dr. Amar Patnaik. Sir, you have been strong advocate of privacy and data protection. However, as you have seen, there are concerns that intermediary guidelines may require intermediaries to collect and process excessive data, thus going against principles of data minimization and data limitation. Do you see such inconsistency between the guidelines and personal data protection bill? It would be great if you could cover these issues in your opening remarks. Over to you, Dr. Patnaik. Thank you very much. Sir, you are on mute, sir.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Amol. Thank you, CUTS, the organizers, for this webinar. Actually, we are at very difficult times. struggling through the day, through the night for helping our people in different parts. And everything is happening through the social media. Everything is happening through WhatsApp messages, everything is happening through Twitter, and people who are requiring oxygen cylinders or anything is all coming through social media. And rightly, the Supreme Court intervened when some people tried to scuttle it. But you see, to the question of, to the very specific question that you asked, one has to be very clear that these intermediary guidelines have been framed under the IT Act. The Personal Data Protection Bill, which will eventually become an act, is a separate act. The Personal Data Protection Bill essentially protects the data of data principals or citizens of all kinds of data, that is data, both electronic as well as manual, which is mechanized. The word they have used in the PDP bill all over is the word automated methods. So the Personal Data Protection Bill, which is basically designed to save the privacy of the individual or data principal in line with the Supreme Court's judgment, Kutaswamy judgment, what it says are those 5 principles you talked about, data minimization. I think in section 12, that entire section, chapter 3, basically picks up 1, data limitation, storage limitation, processing, quality. Everything is just taken from the Supreme Court's judgment and made one section in chapter 3 of the PDP bill. The intermediary guidelines is a response which has come, if you'd see, to a number of cases which are going on in the Supreme Court, including the one on OT, including the one on somehow bringing them under some kind of a regulation for non-print media, that is digital and electronic media. So many cases are going on there. Now, in the PDP bill itself, there is section 26, which talks about 26.4, talks about social media intermediaries, and it explains. But most importantly, section 36, the chapter 8 talks about exemptions, and in that section 36E, it talks about it is about exemptions for certain provisions. So in that, I have the act with me. It basically says that for journalistic purpose, exemptions could be there, and however, it can't be unfettered. It can't be unfettered. So it says that processing of personal data is necessary. These are the cases in which exemptions can be given. That is, if processing of personal data is necessary or relevant to a journalistic purpose by any person and is in compliance with any code of ethics issued by the Press Council of India. That's for the print media, because you should know that Press Council of India is applicable only for print media, or by any media self-regulatory organization. Now, in the intermediary guidelines, the new introduction of an organization for or a self-regulating body which has been prescribed is basically to address this issue of having a body who would determine what would count towards journalistic activity and therefore would have an exemption. It cannot be unbridled, that is, the platforms themselves decide that this is my freedom of speech. Somebody has to decide it. And then there is, of course, the Data Protection Authority prescribed in the PDP bill. The entire thing of intermediary rules you'd see is an action which has been prescribed. You see, in the PDP bill, there are various chapters: role of the data principal, role of the data fiduciary, role of the Data Protection Authority, role of the adjudicators. In this, the entire thing is government prescribing, by taking drawing power under that provision, section 69A and 87.2 of the IT Act, as to what they are basically amplifying what is mentioned already in section 35 of the PDP bill. That is the public order, security, sovereignty, the exemptions that have. The question there also has been raised, that who will determine whether it is proportional, Who will determine whether it is reasonable? Who will determine it is sufficient? And therefore the need for a judicial oversight, which you have mentioned here. I agree to it. All of us have been talking about it. So let's wait how the bill finally eventually comes. The idea is to narrow down these exemptions as much as possible. As you said very correctly, no one can deny the fact that there is a need, whenever required, in the greater, larger public interest. There's a health pandemic, or there is a war, or there is a public order, there is a communal riot. Many of these situations may not be getting faced in other countries. You talked about other countries. How many of them really face communal rights? But if they face racial issues, then there is internet restriction even in the United States. So I think, but the point here is, what is the balance? That's basically the moot question. So when the PDP bill eventually comes and there is a data protection authority, and which we hope that it becomes very robust, then many of these, because that's going to be an overarching umbrella legislation, many of these things will have to comply with that. The rules cannot be inconsistent with Act. In this case, the IT Act. But once the PDP Act comes, then it is becoming the umbrella act actually. This has been discussed in the committee also many times. So in which case, the kind of protection that is required would be available for government action. In fact, I would go to the other extreme to say that when the government has talking about this traceability, now how it would happen, because the question that is happening, that the question that is being raised is that once the encryption breaks, it breaks for everyone in all cases. But then, if I remember after the, I think last month or so, the Facebook has come out with a statement that they are thinking of looking at their, at the back end codes to see if it is possible to provide limited, access to the beginning, or to the person who initiated a problematic content, and give it to the authorities once there is a demand. The point is, once you determine that this is a problematic content and ask for it, there are laws already available, but there are no laws available to determine what is proportionate, what is reasonable. So I've written in many places that India needs to have a separate surveillance law. Now it's a part of the executive decision. It is a part of a joint secretary putting up a file under the Indian Telegraph Act and doing whatever. So that there is a discussion. So that's very important. That has to be complementing the entire effort. But the point is, what I was saying, even if the government, suppose, tells a social media intermediary or a WhatsApp messaging service or any instant messaging service that this is problematic content, you stall it. Now there are penal provisions. They will do whatever action. But the government itself should be in a position to stop it instead of blocking the entire service in the country. Now, whether the government itself has that kind of a technical know-how to pull down that kind of a content, to do that kind of surveillance, the certain which does, there are there's so much of huge amount of content that is generated. So sometimes it is very easy to supply public policy to address a situation without understanding the implementation flaws. That's not just in these guidelines, in many of the government schemes that we see. So it would require finer sharpening. The current intermediary guidelines, I think, are response to situations that arose during that particular point of time, and considering the fact that Supreme Court was also saying that you come out with legislation. But eventually, I have a feeling that once the PDP bill comes, every other legislation has to align itself with it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Patnaik, for your initial remarks. And for me, three things stood out. First, the overarching nature of the incoming PDP bill and the guidelines would eventually need to be consistent with them. Second is the need to consider state capacity and implementation challenges. And third is the need for a separate surveillance law. And I think these are very, very important points that you have touched upon. Next, I would like to go to Mr. Rakesh Maheshwari. Sir, you have heard what Mr. Dr. Patnaik had to say. And also you have noticed from a study which clearly states that concerns of doing away with end-to-end encryption could reduce the utility derived by consumers from encrypted platforms. So is the government ready to take this sort of risk of breaking end-to-end encryption, which might have unintended consequences for consumers and businesses? Your thoughts on this, sir, and other issues that you might want to highlight for consultation. Thank you so much. And over to you, Mr. Maheshwari.
So thank you, Amol, and thank you, Kutz, for giving me an opportunity to convey at least some of the perspectives which were considered when the new intermediary rules were being developed and have been released. Maybe on the traceability part and the encryption part, let me first convey that government does not have any intent for those platforms which are encrypted to break any encryption at all. If you look at the rule clearly, it is very categorically stating that if, as and when such content becomes available to the government, because at the end user devices, it is always unencrypted, 1. 2, that it is attracting the issues of national security, sovereignty, integrity, and the ones which are otherwise dealt by Section 69 of IT Act through MHA, Ministry of Home Affairs. So only for those specific conditions, that too following the process as has been described in Section 69. And second option is left to the judiciary, and even to the judiciary, it is only for some limited category of contents, that too which attract more than 5 years of punishment. That at the hands of maybe message which has been made available or has become available to the government or the law enforcement agencies, that such a request through only these 2 designated channels, that too with the third condition that there is no other better scenario available, that you are asking for the originator. And I have a strong feeling that, first of all, as I said, the content is already decrypted. You are not really looking at, and if the message continues to be the same, the digest of the messages, the hash of the messages can also continue to be the same, and hash in any encryption system continues to be unencrypted. Of course, it can be encrypted as well. It does not really make much of a difference. The content, and we are also not asking for the whole chain of people. We are only asking for the person who initiated. That means the original message. As soon as the message gets changed in between, once again, the new person, the person who has changed the message becomes the new. So in my own opinion, it was never an issue. In fact, in the previous study, in fact, the other point which Sir mentioned about the PDP and maybe the certain principles. So per se, the act is not I should say, it is not countering, except for 1 or 2 perceived areas wherein we are talking of data retention from 90 days to 180 days. So we are not really looking for data to be retained. We are looking for logs and registration details to be retained, and particularly only on 2 scenarios which we have mentioned. The first scenario is quite important, where the user happens to delete the account. Now, user creates, maybe you open an account, you do something mischievous, you close your account, and the whole the data limitation principle says that you don't store or you don't continue to store this person's details, and therefore after some time the digital history is completely vanished. Now in the Indian scenario, maybe sometimes there is a need that you are, while trying to investigate a case, that you realize that account already doesn't exist, and the earlier requirement of 90 days, therefore in most of the cases the investigation agencies were finding that nothing is available from the intermediary perspective, from the intermediary side, and that's where we have increased it to 180 days. Of course, very much will depend upon how the Data Protection Authority, as and when the PDP bill becomes a reality, and the Data Protection Authority, which will come up and develops its own rules and policies, because something which directly comes from the Act, in any case, overrules the provisions in the rules. There were few more points which I will like to mention, and they are proactive identification. I mean, because in the previous presentation, those were mentioned. So first of all, proactive identification. If you look at the draft rules which were published by us in December 2018, of course, I mean, the draft were still not mature enough, but got leaked, and therefore we also made them public. So as to maintain the complete transparency in the system. I will like to mention the Honorable Supreme Court's order in Prajula case, which was a suo motu criminal case, wherein on 11th of December 2018, the Honorable Supreme Court observed that with respect to the child pornography, child sexual abuse material, with respect to the rape and gang rape material, and such other heinous material, there is the tech companies have to make a concerted effort to eliminate. In fact, the word from Supreme Court was to eliminate availability of such contents on the internet. We also understand, I mean, elimination is not possible, and that's how we had communicated it. The observations of the Honorable Supreme Court were based on unanimous recommendation of the tech companies, the lawyers, the MHA, and the MIT, I mean, representing the technical side. But taking a cue from there, we have kept limited provisions for the significant social media platforms that to make an endeavor, a risk-based endeavor to ensure that such kind of contents do not exist on their platform, or something which has already been identified, a digital copy of the same, if it again comes up, the very purpose of takedown actually goes. To that extent, we have mentioned proactive identification only for a limited purpose, and I mean, and proportional to the size, activities, and risks of the platform. Coming to the judicial oversight, yes, we have only two provisions under the IT Act, 69A, dealing with blocking, and of late it has been into, I mean, a lot of, I should say, news, 69A. And the other, of course, are the intermediary rules. Now, 69A already have lots of check and balances, and advance notice is given, an interministerial committee meets, the platform on which the content is available is also invited after the prior notice of 48 hours. And that's how you try to take a collective decision, which is finally approved by the secretary. Now, in case of intermediary rules, there is no such oversight. We completely agree, but then it is not an order, it's a notice for which intermediary is free to accept it or to reject the request. The only risk that you have is that you are liable to lose your exemption provisions. So that means some sort of decision-making capability has to be available. And for doing that, the law enforcement agencies, which we are already, I mean, propagating, that they have to be minimum touch points so that there is an accountability on both the sides, that you have to give the evidence, that you have to tell the law, you have to tell the specific provisions in the law in which it is being considered as unlawful. And of course, it should be doable. So these are some of the things, and maybe I'll come back at an appropriate time to respond to any of the questions which may be relating to the intermediary rules. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maheshwari, for your opening remarks and clarifying few issues. I think a few takeaways for that clear statement that there is no intention of breaking encryption and due process is being followed with adequate checks and balances in place. There are some compliance requirements, but from a government perspective, there are genuine concerns, and there is a endeavor to ensure risk-based regulation. Some of the requirements or executive actions which have been talked about, they are not in order form, but a notice form, and there are. So, having these, I would like to move to Ashish. Ashish, you have heard perspective from government, both lawmaker and the regulatory agencies. What are your thoughts on what has been said till now? Particularly, if you can highlight any compliance requirements or concerns that industry has with respect to intermediary guidelines, and particularly there have been concerns with respect to criminalization of offenses and disproportionate impact on startups. If you can take on some of these issues and respond to what has been said previously. Thank you so much. Over to you, Ashish.
Thanks, Amol. These intermediary guidelines, the final version came in the end of February. So I think we look at 3 months timeline, end of May is when we are looking at compliance. We are already on 6th of May. So one of the things which we have received as a feedback is that can we get more time to comply with this? Now, clearly, I've heard Rakesh Maheshwari on another panel a few days back. And also if we take a leaf from, some of the other regulators in the way they've handled similar situations, I think because we are talking about significant social media intermediaries and they have different operating models, different use cases, and they are pretty much different in the way they operate. So rather than thinking of this as a hard stop on 26th of May, maybe there is a sense of, proactively the industry and MeitY having a conversation on the status of compliances and what challenges the industry might be facing, and then look at a case-by-case approach. Because at present, I think what we are looking at hopefully is a handful of these intermediaries, and therefore, and I've seen past, let's say, RBI doing that and giving then time based on the plans which are submitted, and also giving clarity that, such a plan is acceptable to the regulator. So I think that is one way to proceed, which will eliminate this thing of a hard stop on May 26th of some kind. So that's the first point. The other point, I think, about criminal liability, frankly, it is, I think in some ways it is out of syllabus as far as we are looking at the intermediary guidelines. It is more of an IT Act problem, and we need to solve that. So clearly it should be solved there. And I think there is a separate discussion happening on IT Act. I think where it has become a little more issue is because it is so upfront. It's like, it has been called out in the case of compliance officer shall be proceeded, but I don't think it fundamentally changes anything. Even if it was not called out, it would have meant that. So now what do we do about that? I don't know, but it is clearly a concern. It has just made it difficult for industry to hire compliance officers who will be willing to, look at this and I think that could have been just avoided by not writing it upfront in that manner. So that's the second point. The third point is, on this threshold thing. So MeitY itself published their list of, certain, the user base of the top social media intermediaries. And if you go at that list, it starts at about 400 million and goes down to a very large number still. And then you have a notification which is 50 lakh. So again, why this is relevant is that, and the problem which as NASSCOM we are not able to answer, otherwise I would have come in more strongly. I think the point is that what if there are certain intermediaries which are more local language based in a particular geography and they are significant in that context. So by having a very high threshold, you might leave out some of that. That could be a valid issue. But I still feel that having this low threshold in a start is not necessarily a great thing because it puts a lot of burden on the government. It requires everybody to create that capacity, and then it is still evolving as a law. And I think that is a burden that could have been avoided. The other thing really is that, this, I think there is the big elephant, if I may call it in the intermediary guideline, is this entire thing about enabling tracing of the originator. So, and I think, if government had gone out and said we want decryption, that would have been much worse, obviously. So having said that the government is not calling out for decryption, then we are left with a suboptimal solution from all sides, even from a government side and also from industry side, because there could be 10 similar things which could have been shared from different platforms and then, modified in between and all of that. So you could, so let's say, government had shown one end device and there is an originator of that, but then there could be many more originators of that same message on that same platform, and then over multiple platforms, many more such things. So this entire exercise of enabling tracing of originator, how is it really helpful is itself a question mark, and then companies have to comply with it. So, but I think we shouldn't let a imperfect solution become a reason to say that you should not do it. But then I think the problem really is that this, when you combine it with the low threshold, I think it just makes it much more of a problem. The last point on this before, I kind of end here is that this, the way they have called out this, that, so there are three categories of intermediaries, right? There is an intermediary, there is a significant social media intermediary, and then there is a significant social media intermediary who is primarily into the messaging service. So now that's where this originating bit arises. Now, where this there is a difference in the way you read this definition vis-a-vis the way the definition is in the PDP bill, which clearly calls out B2B and search engine and Wikipedia kind of examples as exceptions. So that's more explicit. So here I think there are some confusions and doubts about what does it mean to be a messaging platform in some sense. I think there is some clarity required. So I think first level, I think I would request METI to consider in terms of the timelines, have a more customized approach and send that message out clearly to the industry. And then some of these points which I have also highlighted, I think I'm happy to talk more about them later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashish. So I think you have clearly made out a case for more customized approach and reconsidering the hot stop for 26th May, while also highlighting some other issues. Mr. Rakesh Maheshwari, do you want to quickly respond to Ashish, particularly on this issue of 26th May, and would there be a little bit more time in which discussion can happen for a more sort of collaborative way to implement these guidelines?
Yeah, first of all, it's a fact that 3 months are completing on 26th of May. But as of now, we have got some representations from industry associations and few representations directly from the concerned industries. And we are cognizant of the problems also which the country as a whole is facing. And therefore, I mean, particularly when you have to open up maybe certain offices in India, or maybe have to have manpower available in the country for certain purposes, we are also cognizant of the problems and are trying to take a sympathetic view, subject to, of course, approval at the competent authority level.
Thank you so much.
And yes, the other aspect also very categorically and very clearly brought out by Ashish. I mean, criminality is something which probably is emanating from the IT Act and not directly from the rules. And this is also something, once again, we are cognizant of, but can be addressed only at the IT Act amendment level and not immediately at the rules. But definitely one of the aim was to ensure compliance, to ensure accountability of the platform, and that has been maybe conveyed a bit loud and clear. So I mean, I can only assure that the effort of ministry will always be, while to ensure accountability and compliance, to also simultaneously ensure that no misuse of these rules happen, or any apprehension, particularly that maybe the CCO will be responsible, personally liable. So there will be always, I mean, enough of checks and balances, the way we are trying to, I mean, the way we are envisaging to implement that.
Thank you, Mr. Maheshwari. These are quite reassuring messages. Now I would like to move to Daniel. Daniel, you have heard India's sort of evolution of intermediary liability and different perspectives. Can you throw some light on how this discussion is evolving at a global stage, and if there are some learnings for different jurisdictions in terms of intermediary liability regulation? Over to you, Daniel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amal, and thanks to CUTS for organizing this really important discussion. It's my pleasure to participate in this conversation with these excellent, esteemed panelists. So, it's important to go back to, I think, the origin of these intermediary laws to understand where we are today. In the United States, it was the law, Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which started many of these conversations about the right way to impose liability on intermediaries and when you shouldn't. And so the original goal of that law was to encourage what they called Good Samaritan behavior. So allowing companies to remove problematic content without facing liability, but also to protect free speech and also to foster innovation online. And so, Section 230 of simply says in the kind of core part of the law, no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. So in short, you can't be held liable for what someone else says online. That's the core of the law, and that's the core of what I think a lot of countries have started with. Then you look at the Manila Principles, which were adopted, globally, and we talked about earlier. It built on this. So it said, yes, we need intermediaries to be shielded from liability, but also we need to make sure that any mandatory content restrictions be accompanied by a judicial order, that requests for content restrictions have to be clear, unambiguous, and follow due process. The content restrictions should be necessary and proportionate in terms of scope, geography, and time. Content restriction laws and policies should, again, follow due process, which means you should be able to appeal things before content must be taken down. And that transparency and accountability need to be built into all of these content restriction laws. And so, those are the core principles I think most countries are operating from. And of course, in the last few years, we've seen a number of new policies emerge that have started to maybe deviate from some of that, principally to address, given problems or what seems like problematic content online. So the European Union, in its proposed Digital Services Act, creates a baseline set of rules for all online intermediaries that embraces those principles, but it also adds additional obligations for online platforms and what they call the very large online platforms, such as a know your business customer requirement, allowing for trusted flaggers to notify these platforms of problematic content and have external risk auditing. So when I look at what we're seeing at the global level in different areas with what I see in India's IT intermediary liability regulation, I think there's a few differences. So one, as we've been talking about, the law directly exposes the chief compliance officer to that personal legal liability for a failure to comply. And the issue there is that it's not that you need to have an enforcement mechanism alone for these policies. Of course, all of these laws have enforcement mechanisms, but the risk here is that you are diminishing free speech because companies are going to restrict more information than necessary to avoid risk exposure. And that's the biggest problem we have with some of these enforcement mechanisms. The second issue, or the second biggest difference here, is that the law also creates these timelines for compliance. Some of them are much different from what other countries have and would impose substantial administrative burdens on the businesses that would have to comply. And I think there's two main problems here. One, there's not clear rules set out yet on how these timelines would work. So for example, if a company receives what it believes to be an incomplete request for content removal, what's the process for responding to that? Is it still held to a 36 or 72-hour timeline? Those are problems that have to be resolved and likely can be resolved through clarification from the government. The second is that the timelines themselves are not reasonable within the existing international legal framework. So in particular, when you're talking about a requirement to turn over information that might be stored abroad, the usual process for that is to use a mutual legal assistance treaty. And the risk is that this requirement here, especially doing this within a 72-hour framework, which the MLAT process is not currently set up to maintain, the only way to adhere to it would be to store the data locally so you could get around that requirement. And so then you're creating a de facto data localization obligation on these companies, which most countries that are embracing digital free trade would say is not the right type of policy to have. So I think that's a serious issue to consider. There's other deviations too that have been mentioned around this identifying the first originator of information, the verification of user accounts. I think those are maybe smaller issues in comparison to some of these others in terms of the biggest deviations. And the last point that is worth mentioning here, of course, is that all of this is in the context of is there a potential for abuse of takedown requirements? This is what I think the platforms are concerned about. This is what users are concerned about. And then we're talking about in the global context, every country is different. But the risk here is that the government can start imposing censorship by ordering social media posts to be taken down that is otherwise legitimate political speech. If you look at some of the companies that are already doing transparency reports, if you look at Facebook, for example, the number of requests coming in from India alone is 7 times higher now than it was 5 years ago. We've seen already, within the second wave, political speech, being taken down, that social media companies are being told to take down because of how it looks to the government. And so this is something that every law should take into consideration how it can be abused. I think that's something that also should be looked at in this context.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I think you have laid the space quite clearly for us and what are the different challenges which different jurisdictions are facing. I particularly would want to sort of highlight the last point on potential for abuse of such takedown requirements. And with that, I would like to go to Gurshabhat. Gurshabhat, you have heard what others said, particularly with respect to concerns of potential of abuse of such requirements. There are also concerns with respect to lack of judicial oversight and absence of due process. While these have been countered by Mr. Maheshwari and others. So can you talk more about what are these concerns and how do you think these are real and not just hypothetical in nature? Thank you so much. Over to you, Gurshabhat.
Thank you so much, Amol, and thanks, Kutz, for inviting me to this webinar. I largely echo the points that Daniel made and also some of the points that Dr. Patnaik made earlier. I think the running theme throughout the rules is that where perhaps there's too much concentration of power in the executive, and this is not just applicable to the content takedown and surveillance requests that we will discuss, but also to just how these rules were issued in the first place, right? If you look at the IT Act, it was clearly not meant to regulate digital media or online content, like curated content platforms, the Netflix of the world, and digital news publishers like The Wire, Scroll, etc. So this is clearly overreach in terms of delegated legislation. There was very specific power delegated to the ministry in what they were supposed to make rules for. I think in this instance, they have clearly overreached that power by mandating regulations on those sort of services. Now let's come back to the intermediaries. Even in that regard, one could argue that several of these provisions are exceeding the scope of what is allowed by the IT Act. So nothing in the IT Act, for instance, permits the government to mandate changes to of a technical nature to intermediaries and platforms, right? So one can argue whether tracing originators breaks end-to-end encryption or not, and that is a discussion that should be well had. But the fact is that the ministry cannot mandate any technical changes that affect security and privacy in this way, right? So that is already ultra vires the IT Act. Now, I'll come back to surveillance requests and content takedown requests. I think, I mean, for years it has been very clear that, and Chinmay Arun, for instance, made this point years ago that, our digital surveillance laws suffer from what you call paper-thin safeguards. There's only executive review of requests. There is no oversight from the judiciary or parliament, not of specific requests or of mass surveillance programs that the government operates. And there's no transparency mechanism either. What we've seen for Section 69A of the IT Act, for instance, Rule 16 mandates confidentiality of such orders. And therefore, you could be affected by these orders, either surveillance or content takedown, and not even know it for you to be able to challenge it legally. In terms of law, the rule of law, this is like egregious enough, but one expects and has seen a chilling effect on speech too. From a judicial perspective, if one looks at PUCL versus Union of India, which sort of ruled on communications privacy, we saw an explicit judicial sanction of only executive review. In fact, the judiciary made rules that only had executive review of phone tapping, right? So, but we should understand that this position has clearly changed after Puttaswamy versus Union of India in 2017, which affirmed the right to privacy, and then Puttaswamy 2, which ruled on the constitutionality of portions of the Aadhaar Act. Now, interestingly, one of the things that the Supreme Court did in Aadhaar 2, and Vrinda Bhandari and Karan Lahiri point out in a recent paper, is that they strike down a provision of data access, partly because it had no judicial review mandated in the Act, right? So while one could have made points earlier about the necessity of judicial oversight, now, as Vrinda Bhandari and Karan Lahiri call it, it's a constitutional imperative. And as Daniel said, it will align our standards with our own constitutional principles and international human rights law if we have a review from an independent authority like a judicial officer. Now, in my opinion, Mr. Maheshwari has painted an overly rosy picture of the safeguards in Section 69A of the IT Act and the blocking rules. I mean, we're grateful for any assurances, but I don't think legal criticism should work on assurances. I think it should work on the language of the law and how we're seeing it in practice. So, like Mr. Maheshwari said, that there's this rule in the blocking rules that says an opportunity of a hearing must be given to the content creator and the intermediary. But has this worked out in practice? Clearly not. When the government ordered takedowns of so many accounts during the farmers' protests, it's almost ridiculous to claim that, you know, the government couldn't reach eminent members of parliament, that it couldn't reach a media house like the Caravan for an opportunity of hearing. But they did not. They almost always use emergency powers to bypass that limited safeguard itself. And this is again apparent in the political criticism that was censored very recently during the second wave of the pandemic, and I mean, thankfully, Twitter sent the notice to the Lumen database, so it's out there for everyone to see in the public domain what sort of speech is censored. And in fact, I'm not a lawyer, but I would urge lawyers to, you know, review those and enlighten us about whether they violate any law, or in my opinion, that speech should be constitutionally protected. So I think judicial oversight is a constitutional imperative, as Vrinda Bhandari and Karan Lahiri call it. It's I'm hoping that some of the challenges that are currently pending in the Delhi High Court, for instance, will change this very, very soon. And I would say it's not just for consumer welfare, as Daniel said, it also aligns us with international human rights, right? The one reason why the government has lower access to, has more cumbersome access to information held in foreign jurisdictions is that our standards are not enough. We can't sign a treaty with the US under the Cloud Act just because we don't have a judicial oversight of surveillance requests. So I don't think it's just about consumer welfare, which I hold as the primary importance in this regard. I also think that mandating judicial oversight will also be of strategic benefit to the government of India. Thanks, Amol. I'll stop here, and I'm very happy to discuss traceability or other points if we have more time later. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you, Gurshad. Thank you for your points and reinforcing the concerns, which we hope Mr. Maheshwari will take in the second round. And I just want to sort of reiterate that we are receiving a lot of questions from the audience, and please feel free to put in the questions, and we will try to take them as much as possible in the chat box. I would like to move to Jhalak next. Jhalak, you have also heard a lot of what government has to say. And there is one particular concern which perhaps you could also talk about is there is this sort of one size fits all approach wherein differently placed service providers or intermediaries are treated through the same sort of stick. Is this a right way to go about intermediate regulation, or something more nuanced or customized can be thought about? Over to you, Jhalak. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Amol. I think, I think significant social media, internet platforms, social media messaging services all play really key roles in our society. And as Dr. Amar Patnaik mentioned, that's really been brought home at a time when we're living through a pandemic. They really support public discourse, public exchange of information, right? So I think there is a need for sort of fresh legislation and regulation to be framed to appropriately regulate them, the sort of power they wield in our society, the sort of impact they have on public discourse. And of course, there are many ways to regulate it. I think the government has taken the initiative to try to plug some of the flaws they see in the system currently through the IT rules. Competition law is one lens to approach the issues that we currently see, another being the IT Act itself. However, whatever regulation and legislation it's framed, and maybe the need of the hour is to frame completely fresh legislation, it needs to be in consonance with human rights and fundamental rights, like the right to speech, the right to privacy, the right to freely conduct business and profession online. And I think these rules have the potential to significantly negatively impact each of those rights. And I think a one-size-fits-all approach is challenging because, in an environment where you have smaller messaging applications, social media platforms that are targeted towards particular vernacular languages, the sort of regulatory burden that sort of comes in with some of the requirements under these rules, will sort of place them at a disadvantage, and in fact will enhance the platform power of larger significant social media intermediaries who already have a high presence in the market. So I think there are definitely concerns about how this sort of the regulations that are coming in through these intermediary liability rules could potentially negatively impact the number of market players you have. And it's important to have multiple market players simply because it gives consumers choice. And consumer choice is, a key component of ensuring that we're able to preserve, rights like data protection, privacy, speech, having a robust sort of domain with lots of players is key towards that. But I think for me, I'm going to come back to the encryption question because I think that's probably one of the most concerning, provisions that's come in. And Mr. Maheshwari very kindly mentioned that, encrypted platforms will not be expected to break encryption, if I understood him correctly, in a bid to, identify the first originator of a message. However, and I guess my question is, what if that cannot be done without breaking encryption? Because in conversation with many technical experts over the last few months since these rules have come out, in conversation with social media intermediaries, what I've sort of consistently heard and the perspective that has been consistently voiced has that it is very, very difficult to trace the first originator without breaking encryption. So I think we sort of have to potentially proceed on the presumption that to comply with what is being brought into through these rules, you will have to break encryption, and social media intermediaries will have to significantly look at re-architecturing, the architecture of their platforms. And I think this just raises a fundamental question for me is, we have to ask ourselves in India, do we have a fundamental right to private communication, to anonymous communication? If we do have such a right, which I think, given some of the jurisprudence that has emerged, then I don't think these rules can really coexist in that environment. Because if you look at the proportionality standard that Puttaswamy sets out, I don't think that you can, for concern of the way a few bad actors are behaving on these platforms, completely do away with the sort of security of communication, privacy of communication that users and consumers are enjoying today. I mean, you have to sort of you have to ask yourself, will breaking end-to-end encryption really solve the issue that the government is seeking to resolve? Because you'll just have bad actors move to different platforms where they will not be able to be traced. Think about it. The Supreme Court found it disproportionate to link Aadhaar to cell phone numbers on the presumption that, and the argument that was brought is terrorists use cell phones. And but the Supreme Court said, is this really the most restrictive means of achieving the objective that the government has in mind? So I think we have to weigh what are the advantages and disadvantages, and what is the impingement on fundamental rights that we have. And is it going to sort of create an atmosphere where people are going to really start thinking about what they're saying and how they're saying it? And then this, if we're seeing such a fundamental shift come in and such an impact on rights of individuals in our country, then this shift has to be brought in through legislation. It certainly cannot be done under rules. It has to go through the parliamentary democratic process of parliamentary debate, of scrutiny by standing committees, and it cannot be done through, IT rules or regulation under the IT Act. So, so I think we really have to think about all of these things. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jhalak. I think really very important points reminding us the necessity of parliamentary scrutiny. Now I would like to move to Srinivas. Srinivas, there have been a lot of confusion about whether actually it is possible to trace originator without breaking end-to-end encryption. And there are two sides of the stories. There are some arguments that yes, it might be possible to do so, but there are others who are saying that it is absolutely not possible. You are the only technological expert amongst us. Can you enlighten us on some of these issues? Over to you, Srinivas. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anmol. Amol. Sorry, I've been on Wi-Fi network. Just in case if anything breaks, let me know. I'll turn off my video. So, I mean, all of the earlier speakers have covered most of the issues, and your own presentation essentially concludes that users want encryption. There's no way that they're saying no to it. And it's also the duty of the state to provide privacy, because we have a fundamental right to privacy. Now, in context to this rules and the question of finding out the first originator, I can tell you a scenario where this rule breaks apart. Disappearing messages. So the concept of disappearing messages is known as forward secrecy, right? So when I send my message, it disappears automatically. And we also have changing of keys, rotation of keys, right? So when you're doing end-to-end encryptions, that the keys continuously change, so that even if there is an interceptor, which need not be Indian government, it could be the Chinese or the Pakistani government, that they can't look at my past messages. So I am always having this forward secrecy where my messages are always end-to-end encrypted. And by asking some of these communication apps to store metadata by asking them to find out who the first originator is, you're forcing them to change the way their app functions. You're essentially forcing them to have permanent recording points of each message, right? Whether it's a hash, whether it's a digest, whatever you call it with different names, at the end of the day, it's metadata that you're asking them to store, while they want to delete away, and the users want these companies to also not store it, right? I don't want any of these apps to ever store my information. I want it to disappear. So it will not happen. And if these rules are trying to force these on some of the companies, people will migrate away to those apps, maybe less than those significant numbers. They could build their own, because these protocols are open. Some of the open source communities might move away to systems like Jabber and Off the Record, which are not even apps anymore, right? These are protocols over the internet. I'll go old school. I am not using any third parties. I'm not even using any servers. It's just peer-to-peer communications where there is no intermediary. I can move away from this process, and it's going to only hurt some of the companies at the end. It may affect primarily Indian companies, because some of the foreign companies will always have their consumer base abroad. And these rules, I must say, India is not the first country which has tried to enforce something like this. If you go back and look at some of the early encryption conversations that have happened in the US in the 90s, the US tried to push this down every American citizen. And it was the American firms who actually told the US government that they are hurting their business because encryption is accessible to anyone outside the country in Europe. So it's not like you can stop people from accessing encryption. It has become an access that anyone can go on. Every programmer can do it, and they can even probably buy it from someone else, right? So these rules are practically impossible to implement. And if you're trying to force them, it will hurt both your industry, it will hurt both the consumers, and it will actually create distrust in the government. And as Grushabhat has pointed out, there is a lack of transparency in all the 69 notifications that the ministry puts up. I just want to move to the other section apart from finding out the first originators. It's the due diligence of the intermediaries with respect to privacy, right? So if an intermediary goes through a breach, through the rules, they are essentially saying they must report it to CERT. Thank you. It's an important thing. Actually, it's actually a progressive thing, because under the IT Act itself, it has always been this voluntary, not so voluntary kind of thing, where companies have always ignored to follow it, where they never report any security breaches to CERT. But I must question, what does happen when we report to them? Because in the past few weeks, there have been so many breaches. And in fact, we wrote to the CERT. CERT has its own grievance officer. It's just not about grievance with the private sector. But the ministry itself is not acting on these issues, and there is no clear communication from the ministry. They are like, we want control, you must tell us everything, but it's not clear whether they will act, and if so, in what scenarios. And I must say, CERT does act when foreign companies are involved. If it's Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, we have actively seen that they do send these notices to these companies saying that you must protect Indian privacies. But when it comes to breaches to Indian companies, suddenly they forget these companies exist. So if you're trying to enforce these rules, whether these rules will be enforced uniformly between Indian companies and foreign companies, and it's not in the essence that of commerce, but from a consumer's point of view, from a consumer rights point of view, will I only get privacy if I go to a US firm, or if I go to an Indian firm, is something that I'll have to decide, and it's being decided based on your current actions. So yeah, so these are some of the major concerns, that part of these rules can never be implemented, and the arbitrariness of all of this with lack of transparency is essentially going to create chaos.
Thank you so much, Srinivas. So I think we have around 10 to 12 minutes for the question and answer session, and we have received a lot of questions to different speakers. So what I'll do, I'll just sort of quickly post one question each to the speakers, and if they could answer them and also state their closing remarks within a minute or so, I would be grateful, and we'll be able to meet time. So let's start with Dr. Patnaik. Sir, there is a question for you that a lot of this discussion has highlighted that a lot of changes, perhaps legitimate in nature, which the government is trying to bring through the intermediary rules, really require parliamentary scrutiny and changes in the primary law. So is that something which you think government should seriously consider and subject these such changes to more rigorous scrutiny of the parliament? Over to you, sir. So you are on mute.
Yeah. So one thing we must remember is that not everything can come into the Act. There have to be rules under the Act. In the case of the Personal Data Protection Bill, in fact, there is a regulation to be framed by the Data Protection Authority, and then there would be even guidelines. Many other stages are available. What the Act should essentially cover is the principle, and the rules would actually delineate those or expand those principles for implementation purpose. Rules generally for implementation purpose. So I think currently whatever has happened as a part of the rule under the IT Act itself, I don't see anything greatly wrong in it. But if you are talking in terms of the principle behind data privacy, access, how much is sufficient, how much is not sufficient, then you have to go back to the Act provision, and in which case, once you are trying to get into the Act, even if it would have been, let's say, a modification of the IT Act, it would have gone through the parliamentary process. But as I said before, this is an evolving field. IT Act came in 2000, and it is evolving independently. Now, suddenly, because of the Puttaswamy judgment, we come to a completely different paradigm of having privacy, informational privacy as a fundamental right, not there in any other country. And since it is a fundamental right, I would consider that this Act, which is safeguarding this particular fundamental right of citizens, would be overriding. In fact, that's the clause in section, I think it is the 56, section 56. Yeah. So the point is, the principles will get debated. It has been debated extensively in the Joint Parliamentary Committee for 1 full year, and it will come up before the Parliament, will again get discussed. Once the shape of the bill as passed in the Parliament takes finality, I am sure every other thing has to be in consonance with that. For example, the rules will happen, the rules will have to be the IT Act itself will have to become consonant with it. In fact, the competition commissions, the trial laws, everything has to be. And most importantly, I think there is a complete, I must inform you that it is not that the rules are also not discussed. There is a subordinate committee on legislation in the Parliament, which is basically there to ensure that the rules under an Act, which are framed by the executive, also get discussed. And they get discussed within a committee, let's say in the Rajya Sabha, with a committee of 15 members, they discuss, they call the department, they can call outsiders. We do that all the time, and then place the report in the Parliament. It is not discussed like a normal bill, but it is laid in the House. So it is not that there is absolutely no scrutiny. And then, of course, as Gurshabad said, that approaching the court is a fundamental right itself. So if the rules or the Act is not in consonance with the basic principle, then they will have the right to go to the court. So I really don't understand. There is any kind of in the absence of rules to the contrary. And generally, this is the principle, judicial principle. In the absence of Act to the contrary, rules take the place of Act, and in the case of rules to the contrary, the guidelines take the place of rules. That's the provision. And whenever there is a contradiction, the Act will prevail. So I think these mechanisms are there. We can debate whether it will be 36. I think government always comes out with the rules, and it will come before the committee. These are all gets debated. But I was coming to the more important point, which last Srinivas was saying, implementation issues, whether we have the technical ability, including the Data Protection Authority. I have been saying the Data Protection Authority, the world over, the regulation falls back behind innovation, whether it is good innovation or bad innovation. So whether we will have the technical ability to pull down a content ourselves if the intermediary refuses to do so or goes to the court of law, one. Number two, If we are asking for a judicial scrutiny, by the time the way our judicial system is, by the time the judgment even in the interim order comes, the damage would have been done, let's say in case of child pornography. So we have to consider many aspects. The implementation issues in India are always the most difficult. And as I have been saying, that what happens to the manual data? It's not that everything is happening in the electronic space at the taluka level or at the collector's level in Gram Panchayats. There also the breaches can take place. And when that happens, then what happens? Who reports? Who controls? What happens? The damage would have been already done. Who assesses it? So I have always been saying, I've written several times in newspaper, print, and digital media, that implementation would be the big issue in data protection, privacy, as well as ensuring that the citizens' privacy is protected, the state interest is adequately protected. Let me re-emphasize, state interest is also important. That's the public interest, that's the citizens' interest. So a balance, in fact, the PDP bill says that while implementing, if it causes harm to another data principle, then you stop. So that is the thing, you know, there is jurisprudence. So it would have been better if it would have come through the act, but eventually it will get discussed, I'm sure, in the parliament when the PDP bill comes. Currently, in the absence of anything, I think this is a good thing that the government has done. Some amount of responsibility has to be there. The point is that if there is over-regulation, then of course it kills innovation. It's a high compliance cost. That has to be safeguarded. For a growth, for a digital growth, for the growth of the digital economy, we need it. And fortunately, the PDP bill at the preamble itself, and the Supreme Court itself says that using data for digital economy is also of paramount importance.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Patnaik. We move to Mr. Rakesh Maheshwari. So we have two questions for you. First is government, can government also think about phased implementation of the rules? For instance, some provisions which are more difficult in nature being implemented later, while other provisions in which there is some consensus amongst different stakeholders, they can come in force a little bit sooner. And secondly, you have heard Dr. Patnaik and others about implementation challenges, and if you can also talk about these in your closing remarks. Over to you, Mr. Maheshwari. Thank you.
Yeah. So, thank you, Amol, once again. See, the very purpose of coming out with two different timelines for these rules, and also to carve out rule number 6 for other significant intermediaries, and maybe to have due diligence based on whatever particular intermediary that we are looking at. Therefore, was to, in a way, give space for different sized intermediaries to implement the due diligence as is expected from them. As I already mentioned in between, that given the challenges that the country is passing through, given that I completely agree that some of the obligations which we have asked them to follow may require maybe sufficiently more time, or maybe a bit more time than what we have otherwise set expectations from them. So for that reason, the government always remains open to a legitimate, I should say, requirement, and we will remain open. We are open. We have already, I mean, initiated at least internal discussion as to how should we really take it up. So that's one. I just also wanted to convey that as far as though Sir did mention, I mean, that the rules, for example, have to be laid in Parliament. They have already been laid in Parliament on 25th or 24th of March. At least in Rajya Sabha they were laid, and so intent is very clear. We have also been scrutinized by the Standing Parliamentary Committee on IT. So we have been, I mean, the whole intent, the whole content have already been discussed. Implementation does remain a challenge, and that's true everywhere. I mean, even internationally, even within India. And the point, therefore, is that we are trying to make a best effort as to how these rules can be implemented, should be implemented. We have even empowered the general users, which was somehow withdrawn, I mean, post Share Singhal, that general users should also be empowered in certain specific scenarios. So from our perspective, the effort has always been, particularly in these rules, for safeguarding of citizens' rights. The intent was clearly like that. The intent was also to make the larger platform more accountable than the smaller platforms. Even if we are saying maybe that you have to have full, maybe a nodal contact person or grievance officer, I mean, the fact remains that this country didn't have the grievance officer, even from the larger companies in India. We never had any nodal officer to talk to. They are completely faceless entities. So you may say that there is an Indian representative, there is none. There is none. I mean, that's the fact. So I mean, while we are cribbing, I mean, I as a citizen also maybe sometimes feel, but we have also seen when problems happen, there is practically nobody that they are able to approach to. There are cultural differences that India has with respect to the other countries, and maybe those cultural differences, our expectations have to be understood, which is what we are trying to do when these intermediary rules have been put in place. Of course, as I said in the beginning also, we are trying our every bit to ensure that while the objectives of these rules are met, there is minimum misuse potential and accountability on both the sides, at government side, at platform side as well.
Thank you, Mr. Maheshwari. I'll now move to Ashish. Ashish, there is a question that there are some legitimate asks from the government and citizens and expectations from the citizens to the platforms, which perhaps platforms haven't been able to comply with or reinforce the trust of citizens in terms of grievance redress, as Mr. Maheshwari has also pointed out. So if you can just quickly highlight what are those steps which platforms are themselves taking to curb problematic content and ensure grievance redress, along with the closing remarks, I think that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Amol. So I think obviously the trend is to invest a lot more in content moderation, and I think that is something that is happening. I think what these guidelines are also doing is by requiring now grievance redress mechanism. I think it will really be. We have to see how it gets implemented, but I think in principle it is something that we very much support. And even if you know this entire startup and large company argument, if you see, but from no startup is looking to stay startup, right? So while you can talk about a threshold, and we can debate about that because I'm not convinced about the current threshold, but I think setting up for a model which actually and grievance redressal is essential in that sense. So not saying that putting a grievance redressal will therefore make my model unworkable. I think that is not a choice anymore. So that I think will happen. In terms of my closing thoughts, I think there are short-term stuff. So what we need is, a standard operating procedure, some kind of validation procedure for section 3.1D and 3.1J. So that I think should come out soon. I'd like to reiterate that we do need a customized approach. I think this 3-month timeline is problematic, and so that should happen. Third, I think MeitY will need to invest a lot more in their own capacity, because this entire debate on what is possible technically and what is not possible. I mean, as NASSCOM, I cannot also comment what you can do technically and what you cannot do without breaking encryption. And this kind of a, this continuous debate actually reduces the trust in both the guidelines itself, and therefore it's not good for the country. So I think MeitY should really be able to have that conversation in a more solid manner technically, so that if MeitY is wrong, then they should go back and change that, and if they are right, then industry should get that message and implement it in fully without saying that it is possible and it is not possible. So I think that's the second part. And the third, finally, I think, and where I don't hold the intermediary guidelines responsible, I think there's already work happening on the IT Act, and irrespective of what happens in PDP Act, I think we need a more solid version of the IT Act, which builds in this oversight mechanisms at a principal level within the law, so that you effectively will not be able to put out guidelines or regulations, rules, which seemingly then do not provide you that confidence. So I think that has to flow from the Act. And currently that bit is missing in the Act, and we would look to see that in the Act itself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashish. I have a question for Daniel as well. Daniel, as you might have noticed that there are penal provisions in the Act, and there's a question that do you think this will deter foreign investment in India's digital economy? Can you talk a little bit about this based on your global experience? Thank you.
Sure, and I'll be brief. I mean, I think the guiding motivation for this law should be, to balance, should be to strike a balance between free speech, innovation, protecting consumers, protecting businesses, but also global interoperability. No country can set its own rules for the internet, and that's something that, even though every country, does have sovereignty, they still have to think about how, they work on these global platforms and what rules they can legitimately set. In particular, that's where I think the rules on personal legal liability and the timelines which create de facto data localization should be adjusted. But this gets to that bigger question about what's the role the Indian government sees for itself and sees for the country and the digital economy, because you can't regulate your way to innovation. And I think embracing principles of digital free trade, spurring companies to make more investments in this area, that's the way to make India continue its success and lead in this area. And so I'd hope India can look at what's been successful in the past and continue that in the future, because it has emerged as one of the leaders in the digital space, and there's so much more growth opportunity in here.
Thanks, Daniel. I have a question for Jhalak as well. Jhalak, Uday, in his personal capacity, asks you that what is your opinion regarding small market players? Is it possible for them to adhere to such compliances, or do they need to reinvent their complete business model? Thank you.
I think I'm probably not someone best positioned to respond to that question, since that's really not the area of focus of work. But if you look at regulatory theory, I mean, one of the key elements of that that is underlined repeatedly, is the fact that heavy regulation does impact growth of business and innovation, and tends to always favor larger market players and negatively impact the growth and stability of smaller market players. So I'll sort of leave it at that, because that's really not my area of expertise.
Thanks. Gulshabad or Srinivas, would you like to take that question?
Sure. Maybe I can also, like, I don't work for a company or make products on the regular, but what I'll say is, of course, let's take the example of the traceability provision. There are several ways in which you can implement it, right? The government officials have said to the media, and I think Mr. Maheshwari also mentioned it in another call, which was that platforms can hash all messages and keep a copy of that, right? Another method was by Professor Kamakoti in the Madras High Court, which was that you add the content creator metadata to each message that's being sent. Now you can look at these particular proposals, and they both have impact on security and privacy. But really, one of the reasons why launching digital services is relatively cheap is that there is a lot of critical digital infrastructure that is free and open source in nature, which includes the Signal protocol, which like WhatsApp adopts. So if you look at the messaging solutions available, there is no solution that will comes out of the box complying with traceability, right? If I want to set up an Indian company that offers private messaging services, it's very easy, or it's relatively easy for me to take the Signal protocol and try and implement it. But what these kind of regulations on specific technologies do is that they prevent like this sort of global sharing of the technical commons, which a lot of digital services are based on. So in one way, Indian services will be like, oh, it's too costly for me to deploy end-to-end encryption now, just because I have to comply with XYZ tracing. And similarly, things can be said of any regulation that sort of impose technical choices. So I think in that regard, the cost of compliance will go up. I do think while classifying intermediaries is the need of the hour, I will stay by my point that there's like more scrutiny needed on whether it's possible through delegated legislation. And as Dr. Patnaik said, it will go to the subordinate legislation committee in the parliament, and I hope it receives the scrutiny that it deserves. Similarly, classifications based on number of users. I think we did need more specifics, and let's compare it with Germany, where it was clearly said that number of active users has to be calculated this way, right? I think it's like monthly active users who have IP addresses based in this jurisdiction. So rules are meant for that sort of clarity, but instead we have like lots of legal thinking that I think needs to be done in the law. And I think Ashish Agarwal made a similar point that there's like need to think at the law level now, which will better address like both compliance costs and the rights question.
Thank you so much, Bushwal. And last question to Srinivas. Srinivas, how do you think we can achieve a balance through a cooperation between consumers, civil rights activists, and industry and government?
Okay, so when we are looking at this whole idea of sovereignty, right? So this is all coming out saying that, okay, the question of national security is involved, right? When you look at from a very consumer point of view, it's individual sovereignty we are looking at, right? Like it's part of the individual sovereignty that goes to the state. The state is something that exists because of us. We don't exist because of the state, right? So now between balancing these two, individual sovereignty and a national sovereignty point of view, you can only do that when both the individual and the state are at almost equal power structures. We are not in that level, right? Like an individual cannot compete with a nation state. And to do that, what we do in democracies is we have democratic institutions like the parliament, like the judiciary, which essentially ensure that the balancing act happens. And at this stage, it's very clear that the executive is trying to do things that it's not supposed to be doing. And this battle is now going to be fought in institutions. And I can't tell you whether the state will win or whether the individuals will win. But at the end of the day, this is the democratic process, and only time will tell.
Thank you so much, Srinivas, for your closing thoughts. I'll now request my colleague Siddharth, to do the closing remarks, given that we have now come to the discussion. And I would like to thank each and every one of you for your thoughts, and also participants who have raised some very interesting questions. Over to you, Siddharth, for closing remarks and vote of thanks. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Amol. The discussions from the webinar have provided us valuable insights on the subject. Quickly, just to summarize, a few takeaways for me would include the importance of judicial oversight cannot be less emphasized while ordering content takedown. To determine what is proportional, what is necessary and reasonable would require the same. And judicial oversight may also be considered as a constitutional compulsion. The Personal Data Protection Bill will be an overarching law once passed. Hence, it is important to align the IT rules with it with respect to principles of data minimization and data limitation, as well as on the issue of government's access or takedown of data. The rules in their current form may also be considered as excessive delegation of law in this regard. And ideally, it would have been better if they had passed a parliamentary debate before being finalized. It has been clarified that the government does not have any intention of breaking encryption. In this regard, it might therefore be useful if the same can be explicitly mentioned in the IT rules for building consumers' trust on digital communication services, and also for ensuring that intermediaries are not required to change their existing service architecture. From the government's perspective, there are valid concerns with respect to problematic content being transmitted on intermediary platforms. However, there is a need for risk-based and proportional regulations to curb the same. That is one which keeps consumers at the center while also considering compliance burdens for startups and other intermediaries. Thresholds for defining significant data fiduciaries may need to be revisited from a startup perspective, and also considering local geographically confined intermediaries who may have a significant user base in a particular area and may be operating in a vernacular language. A customized approach may therefore be useful here. It is also important to refer international good practices while implementing the IT rules. However, a one-size-fits-all approach may not be adopted considering India's uniqueness, and a regulatory impact assessment may be useful here to ensure that the costs of implementing the regulations do not outweigh its intended benefits. Also, a regulatory sandbox approach may need to be adopted before implementing the rules regarding proactive identification of problematic content to ensure that the proposed automated technology respects consumer privacy and principles of personal data protection. Lastly, it is also important to develop technical expertise, particularly of CERT or the proposed data protection authority under the Personal Data Protection Bill, for effective implementation of the IT rules and the PDPP. To conclude, as the way forward, CUTS would be preparing a policy brief on the intermediary guidelines based on today's discussion and findings from our study. We will be circulating the same in due course of time. With this, we come to an end of this webinar. We thank each of the speakers and participants for joining us today. Stay safe and enjoy your evening.